for this event on board diversity, the good, the bad and the ugly. And you'll probably just got the notification that's come up saying we're going to be recording this event today. So just bear that in mind in regards to whether you wish to have your camera on or off. And as usual, if everyone could mute while they're not speaking, that would be really useful so we can hear everyone well. We also have the chat function, so you can pop any thoughts or questions you have while we're going along today, and we'll try and get to some of the questions at the end. So this event is being run in collaboration between the Young Trustees Movement, which is a movement of people both inside and outside of the charity sector, working to increase the number of young trustees on charity trustee boards, with our aim being to double the number of young trustees by 2024. And it's also being run by Time to Change, which is a Surrey-wide project delivered by Voluntary Support North Surrey on behalf of the Surrey Council of Voluntary Services, which aims to enable more young adults to volunteer. So today we're going to hear some real-life examples and the honest truth about the challenges and opportunities that focusing on board diversity brings, and think about how board diversity could help your charity, and explore what support you can access on the journey to a more diverse board. So we're going to start today by hearing from our two speakers about their experiences and some answers to some pre-prepared questions before opening out to the audience to answer any questions you might have. So please do put them in the chat box as we go along as they come to you. You're also able to raise your hand at the end to ask any questions verbally if you would like to. So I'm personally really looking forward to this session. I hope you'll find it very useful. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ruth to introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Kate. So as Kate said, we're both ambassadors of the Young Trustee Movement, and we're both young trustees in our own right, but really excited to be joined today by Peter Davies, who's a chair of a board that looks after and has young trustees, and Rihanna, who is a young trustee. So I'm going to hand over to those guys to give a quick introduction of themselves, a bit about their experience and the context within they're talking from. So Peter, if I can kick off with you and ask you to give us a couple of sentences about where you've been and what you've been up to.
Brilliant, thanks Ruth, and well done to you for organising this event and for the work of the Young Trustees Movement, which is a really key movement. Yeah, my name is Peter Davies. I chair the Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and thinking about it, I've been employed in the voluntary and charitable sector probably since 1986, I think. So I have a long background in terms of working in the sector, and over the years as well, I've been a trustee and indeed chair of a variety of charitable bodies, from small to to quite significant. And I'm very proud to be chair of the Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and I'm conscious that I have my chief executive as part of the call tonight, which is lovely, and also I think possibly the company secretary, who both of whom keep me straight as the chair of Wales Council for Voluntary Action. Yeah, and for those of you who are not aware, WCVA, a sister organisation of NCVO, I'm sure all of you are aware of NCVO. Well, we play a similar role in Wales. Slightly different because we have also a significant relationship, a partnership with the CVC network in Wales, Third Sector Support Wales, which is the network of WCVA plus all the county voluntary councils that we work closely with. So great again that this evening is part of, I'm sure there's things that we can learn from the work here in Surrey. Once upon a time I was a resident in Surrey, West End, just outside Woking for a few years, so fond memories of that. But in terms of my role as chair, and I make no apologies for this, I want to sort of just start by just stressing the core functions of the role of the board, and for that, I draw on, as I've always done, the work of Julia Unwin and her definition in terms of the 5 S's of governance. And I think it's important we start the session to sort of focus on the function of governance. The board, the support, the first key S, the support that the board needs to bring to the executive, the celebration of achievements, the support to the team in problem solving, but also the challenge to the team. And that's where the next S comes in delivering a stretch for the organization in terms of adopting good practice and driving improvement. The core function of scrutiny, though, is also critical in terms of ensuring the checks and balances across the critical decision-making and robust risk management. And that enables the staff to feel confident that in the decision-making that they're taking and support that they have from the board. But the board is also the guardian of the assets of the organization for the long term. So it's about stewardship for the long term, both in terms of the assets, commercial, intellectual, and reputational. And in that sense, the board has a key role in working with the executive in developing the strategy and bringing a range of experience and external viewpoints. And I think that's the point that I then come back to in terms of this session. That board can only function to deliver those 5 S's if it has a diverse perspective and is able to bring diverse views. I think one of the challenges that we might explore is the sector can be very cozy in the sense that boards of trustees are made up of friends and contacts of chief executives and chairs, and it can lead to a very cozy set of relationships that doesn't deliver on those 5 S's, and certainly brings a sense of focus which doesn't have a diverse, challenging focus to the function of the board. And as we'll go on to talk about, the young person role is critical in driving, I think, challenge, bringing energy, and bringing views for the long term to the board. But we explore more of that in the discussion that's coming up.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that introduction, Peter. Really, really interesting. Over to you, Rihanna. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself and your experience in the charity sector.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rihanna. I'm the founder of a youth-led dementia charity called Dominica Dementia Foundation. I founded this in 2016 in memory of my grandfather. After that, I went on to pursue psychology at a university level. So I've got a bachelor's degree in that. And then over the years, I've just kind of found myself contributing to social impact in a number of ways. As a trustee of Age UK Hive, I contribute on that level, as well as through an organization called Voluntary Services, and they're kind of like an educational charity that provides employment to young people in Zimbabwe and in the UK. So yeah, I think that's kind of me basically in a nutshell. But yeah, my life is just based on purpose and impact. So yeah.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that introduction, Rihanna. That's great. So I've got now a series of questions I'm going to ask you both. They'll be similar for both of you, but thinking about it from the different perspectives you have. So I'm going to kick off and ask you, particularly, can you talk to your experience? So Peter, I'll start with you. Can you talk to your experience being on a board with Young Trustees? What's that been like? How's that been different to other boards you might have been on?
Yeah. We had an objective in WCVA to we do a lot with young people, but we hadn't had a significant involvement of young people on the board, so we put it as a key board objective to engage young trustees. And delighted that we've had Joe as been our lead. Joe Stockley, who's involved in the Young Trustees Movement, has been our lead young trustee over recent years. I think what Joe has brought, I think I've mentioned some of this, I think Joe's brought energy and drive. I think he's brought a perspective, which is the fact that, partly because he's actually not that senior in his own organization, obviously because of his age. So he brings a perspective in that, I think, that links to the staff team very, very strongly. He sees it from a perspective that perhaps the rest of the board doesn't see. He certainly contributes to the board dynamic, and he brings also, I think, a view on the use of technology and the need for digital revolution across the organization that is critical. And so we now have a board WhatsApp group, which was Joe's initiative. He's also played a key role, though, in terms of our work with the youth in terms of younger voluntary sector involvement. We run a youth grants program for voluntary organisations that young people themselves make decisions on, and Joe's overseen that from our perspective. So he's brought that to the role, and I think it's also given other board members an opportunity to sort of work more closely and support, and to a degree mentor when needed, a younger board member who is obviously going to play a key role a key role for the future of the sector in Wales. So, you know, he's adding a huge amount of value to the board now, but I think we also see it as an investment for the long term, because he's going to play a key role in the sector when we are no longer as active in the sector as we are now.
That's great. Thanks for that, Peter. Rihanna, over to you. Can you tell us a bit about your experience being a young trustee on two different boards? Was it what you thought it would be? How, you know, how's it met your expectations or been different to your expectations?
Yeah, sure. So with that role, the way I came across is I had a kind of different perspective when it comes to trusteeship. I thought you had to be a certain age and, you know, have to have like wealth of experience and that kind of thing. But then when I looked at different requirements for trustees, that wasn't necessarily the case. So then that kind of opened opportunity to get involved in that capacity. And during my role, it's been really good. I feel like I've been really welcome into the role. I went through a process of meeting the other trustees, and they kind of giving the final say as to if I'm a good fit for the organization. And since then, yeah, I think I've contributed quite well. I'm the only Black and youngest person on the Age UK Hive organization, but with Varna Trust, I think I am the youngest, but I'm not the only Black trustee in that organization. So there are kind of like varied demographics for both organizations. But I think, yeah, the level of contribution on my part is pretty much both ways. There has been like high and lows due to like job responsibilities and just life in general. It can be quite hard to meet sometimes because of that. Most of the people on the trustee board for HUK Hive are either like retired or freelancers, and they have more flexibility. However, when I'm just kind of in my early stage of my career development, it's kind of hard to kind of contribute as much as I'd like to in that capacity. Because most days, like we meet on Mondays, but that doesn't work for me because I work on Mondays, but it works for everyone else. So they end up meeting on Mondays anyways. So it's that kind of thing. It's just now, how do I contribute in a way that benefits everyone, even though I'm not able to attend the meetings as much as I'd like to. So it's just that kind of thinking around it. But apart from that, yeah, it's been really good. I believe that I've been able to contribute a lot. I've been able to share my ideas, and I felt like they have been sincerely taken aboard. I don't feel like I've just been kind of blocked out. I feel like it's a really open space, and they're open to listening to what I have to say, and they value my contributions, which is most important. Because what you find in some organizations, when you come with like new experiences, new ideas, you know, a new way of thinking, it can be quite hard to break into an organization that's already rooted in different policies and rules and you know, strategies that might not even work, but because they are so rooted in those rules, they would rather take that instead of having a young person with, you know, trying to just change things. It's not really change things per se, but just make it better. Let's work better together. So it is sometimes tackling that kind of level of thinking sometimes. But yeah, I think, you know, intergenerational trusteeship is definitely very important, because you both bounce off each other, you both learn and contribute and grow together. So I think it's a well-rounded kind of situation when you have that.
That's great. Thank you. Really interesting what you talk about there around kind of just the format of the meetings and when they happen, and that traditional sense that we meet on Mondays. You know, what would you say to boards who are looking at opening up to more diverse trustees, and, you know, what advice would you give them about maybe meeting those different needs of different demographics, i.e. not catering for those who are, you know, just retired and therefore have more flexibility in that working week?
Yeah, I think definitely just be flexible. If you can meet maybe outside of working hours on the weekdays, that might be helpful. So if someone finishes at 5 or 5:30, let's try and meet after that time, if that works for them, or meet on the weekends. You know, just kind of see how you can go about it a bit more, maybe catch up with that person and then say, oh, this is what we discussed, because emails and stuff like that can also be put in a back burner when it comes to these kind of things, because you've got other responsibilities. You can't really, you know, sit down and review minutes and stuff like that. So if you actually have a one-to-one with them and say, okay, let's now pull up the meetings together and let's go through it together, that might help them to kind of, you know, feel like there is some level of involvement and engagement with the board, instead of them not being able to attend and just reading it on their own. It can be like a disengagement. So if there is some physical, like, you know, virtual contact with the board, then that kind of brings in a level of inclusion needed, you know, to continue on with the role. So I think, yeah, just being quite flexible and just making sure that there is some kind of contact, some kind of engagement, communication going forward with the board members as well.
That's really interesting. That makes me think of a board that I've sat on. We had buddy groups and we arranged those around the availability of the trustees, but had a pre-meet before every board meeting to go through the papers. And it really, as a young trustee myself, it really helped me, empower me to feel I could ask the questions at that safer space and then take them to the main board. Peter, I wanted to open that to you as well and ask you really, how has it worked for you guys in terms of making those board meetings accessible for younger people who might work? And I know you gave me some ideas the other day about how we might work with the employers of more young and diverse trustees to kind of make that more accessible. Is there anything you'd want to add here?
Yeah, I think this is a key issue for the sector in terms of the role of trustees in general. You know, I think there is a case that there needs to be a requirement for employers to release trustees for board meetings. You know, I think we should be campaigning hard as a sector to ensure that employers recognise the role of trustees and allows staff time and recognise that as a key function. I think it's even more difficult for younger trustees under the current circumstances, because it's more difficult for them to get the release out of their organisation. I know in our case, Ruth, who's on the call with us, the chief executive, you know, made a point of writing to the CEO of the organisation that Joe is employed by, and obviously thanking the organisation for the release of Joe, but also, you know, setting out the opportunities that we were now providing Joe in terms of his development through being a board member and the contribution that he was making. I think that was helpful and important. But I think there is a bigger case that we need to make more generally as a sector for the release of trustees as part of a commitment from employers to supporting communities. You know, many employers have time off policies which are not used very effectively. I think it would be much more effective to focus on the role of trustees and enabling employees and supporting employees to become trustees. Going back on a couple of points that Rihanna mentioned, you know, I know that Tracy, who's our company secretary, who's also on the call, you know, was key in terms of providing support and the induction process for the new trustees, and for Joe in particular in this case. And I think one of the confidence building exercises is working in small teams, so that there are, you know, when you come to the full board meeting, you've already built relationships with 2 or 3 other members of the board. That builds you confidence. So, you know, we have subgroups working on different projects. So that engagement of the younger trustee in a subgroup builds relationships, builds confidence. And one of the things that I found as chair, that, you know, some of the best questions come from the younger trustee who, you know, is just asking that obvious question that sometimes you miss.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, completely agree. That's definitely been my experience as well, and I love that idea, Ruth, of writing to the CEO of Joe's organisation to really value that role. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and hopefully everyone on this call feels that, you know, if they're looking to recruit young trustees and young volunteers, that might be something they could do to support them to have that time and space. to do that volunteering. And Peter, I just wanted to touch on as well around how you might kind of facilitate the development of a journey through your volunteering process through for young people from that kind of early start where they might be a volunteer in a different capacity that might then go through to being a trustee. Is that something you've kind of got a formal process around, or is that something you're interested in developing?
Yeah, I think we've all been part of conversations, I'm sure, about the need to build diversity of our boards, and I think one of the key questions we need to ask ourselves is how effective we are at outreaching as an organisation and engaging diverse communities as an organisation, because there's no way we're going to get young people or a more diverse board if we're not engaging and working with those young people and more diverse communities. I've been part of discussions with smaller charities who say we need to get more diverse board, but the obvious point is we're not actually engaging with a more diverse community. So you've got to have that engagement first, because it is a journey from becoming involved. Trustees are generally passionate about the cause they're interested in and feel that they can make a difference to that particular cause. So you need to have that set of relationships which delivers that diversity of organisational operation that then leads to engagement that can lead to trusteeship. So and I think there are important mechanisms that you can do there. There are leadership programs, future leader programs, initiatives that I mentioned the fact that we have the youth grants program. Well, there decisions are made by panels of young people making decisions on the allocation of those grants. So you're building capacity and you're building experience and confidence in those sorts of experiences that then can lead to becoming, if you like, a full trustee of a charity going forward. So it is definitely a journey. And I think where we go wrong quite often is we have a vacancy on the board and we try and see how we fill that with a more diverse, to deliver a more diverse board, and we simply try and advertise for it in different routes. And that doesn't deliver. And it's a very false process.
That's really interesting. Rihanna, is that something that you did? Were you a volunteer before you were a trustee at the organisation, or did you kind of go straight in as a trustee? And would you recommend to other young people that might be an approach to take?
Yeah, so I actually just went straight in with the Voluntary Trust trustee role. They actually approached me using social media on LinkedIn. So I was connected to the founder of that organisation, and she said, we've got a trustee role that would like to offer you the opportunity to apply, and that's how I got involved with them. And then that kind of brought to my attention, it then changed my perspective on trusteeship, and then I started to look at other organizations to see if I can get involved as a trustee. So I think it's definitely important that we teach young people that they can get into managerial roles as young as in their 20s. They don't have to wait to their 30s or 40s to get into these kind of advisory leadership positions, right? But yeah, the other one with the HUK Hive one, I just looked at in my local community to see if there's any vacancies for trustees, and I found one with them, and I just applied, and we went through the process together. But yeah, that was my route.
Really interesting. Thank you. I've been interested to hear from you, Rihanna, about kind of any ideas that you've had at either of those boards that you feel the kind of organisation's really taken on board, any kind of developments you feel might have happened as a result of you being in that space that might not have happened if you hadn't been there. Is there anything you might want to pull out?
I think with the Voluntary Trust one, involving young people in ways that they haven't thought of, because they've got kitchen staff and stuff like that, and I thought of involving a young chef that I know, to be a part of that. And that's also kind of some unconventional thinking going on as well, because you're like, how can an 8-year-old be a chef? But there's actually young people doing great things in roles that you would never even imagine. So thinking about how can we get a young person doing this is always something important to think about. Just put young people first. Just in the back of your mind, just put young people first. If there's a vacancy, how can we get young people in? If there's a project, how can we get them involved in? So just always have them in the center of your minds, basically. But yeah, I brought that forward to them, and then I connected them with the young chef. So yeah, I think it's just important to have that youthful thinking all the time, because it will definitely carry forward in all the youth involvement we want to see.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting experience. Peter, you talked about how Joe really has that fundamental understanding and kind of relevant experience of what it's like to be a staff member at your organisation. Could you talk a bit more to kind of how that benefits you as a board, and what benefits that might have in terms of his experience that he brings to the board?
Yeah, I think he can see things from the staff's perspective because he's not senior in the organisation that he works for. So yeah, I think that's just a perspective that he brings, because he's not senior in the organisation he works for. So when we're making decisions or we're considering issues, he will see it from the position of a young member of staff in the organisation, in the same way as he would see it from his own organisational perspective. So I think that is that's a significant contribution that he makes in that sense. Yeah, I think the other thing I just wanted to come back to, I guess, is the fact that we have quite a lot of structures in Wales. We have a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which talks about ensuring that all decisions that we make take into account the long term and the needs of future generations. And so there's quite a sort of increasing expectation in Wales that we engage young people in that sort of decision making. So we have a Commissioner for Future Generations. She's established a Future Leaders program, which is about building young people's capacity to be future leaders, to deliver the vision of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I don't think this is the case in England, but all schools are legally required to have a schools council. And that's a legal requirement, and that again is about building that sort of experience that then can be taken forward from that experience into the sector. Obviously there's a youth parliament in England as well. We have our youth parliament. I chaired the Climate Change Commission for Wales over a period of time, and we engaged representatives from that youth parliament on the Climate Change Commission. And I think you've only got to think now about the importance of climate change and COP26 that we're in now, and the role of young people in changing the agenda. And so if there's one thing an organisation can do in terms of looking to respond to the challenge of climate change, it is about engaging young trustees, because that's where the change has been driven from. There's no question that the momentum that we've seen has been driven from young people strikes, the Greta Thunberg movement. All of that has been a key theme about young people. So if we're going to respond to the impact of COP, we've got to engage more young people in the governance of organisations to deliver that vision.
That is music to my ears, as my day job is sustainability lead at a children's charity, and yeah, absolutely agree with you. I think young people are leading the way on sustainability, and I know it's a big passion for Kate too, to consider that, and we absolutely agree. That's really really interesting and great to hear you say that, Peter. Rihanna, open to you if you wanted to respond to that or give your feedback on what Peter's just said.
Yeah, I would just say, kind of think about what attracts young people, what do young people care about? What kind of shared interests do we have that we can work on together? And that's how idea generation happens. Then you continuously working on projects of impact, of value, of purpose. It's a collective action. So we want to make sure that we're getting the most out of young people, and they work better when they are driven by motivations. We all do. So just making sure that they're working on something that they're passionate about is very important. It is so important. And then I also think not limiting what they can achieve as well, like involving them in the accounts. Why not? If they're someone that, has that kind of finance mindset, they can probably provide value in that space as well. It doesn't only have to be consultancy. It doesn't only have to be, reviewing minutes or something like that. I mean, it's endless when it comes to young people. So just having that conversation with them on what do they care about, what would you like to get involved with the accounts or something like that, you know, is quite an important discussion to have, because yeah, there is, you know, different routes in involving young people. It doesn't just have to be one particular topic or project. So it's just ensuring that they have the capacity to take on these things, but they should be willing and able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, just to chip in, I sort of agree with that, and also I think, you know, it is a challenge. You know, I talked about challenge and stretch, and it's a challenge and stretch to the board, because I think as indication of the board's effectiveness, the degree to which you can engage a young person on the trustee, the culture of the board. It says a lot about the culture of the board. You know, whether the board has some fun. You know, I think that's important. You know, are there laughs around the board table? You know, is it a relaxed atmosphere? You know, I think it's quite a challenge to the board to make sure that that culture is there for that young person to feel, at home and accessible and part of something actually that's making a difference, but also is something that, you know, is enjoyable.
I would also add, like, your style of leadership is very important with how you engage with young people, because your style might not work for everyone else. You know, I say that in like an example. Let's say there's a young person and you give them a particular project in the organization, and then I don't know, maybe a couple of days after you're following up, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? That kind of thing. It's gonna kind of withdraw them at some point. They're just like, you know, I will get it done. Give me a deadline and I'll work towards it. You know, that kind of thing might help. Because people work in different ways. So it's all about learning how the young person works best and work with them on their timeline and how they work best, I think. So it's just kind of like, again, reframing your mindset when it comes to leadership. How do you lead young people? You know, how do you lead that particular person? You know, because everyone's different. It will definitely take you far if you think of it in that way.
Just chipping in one final thought, which I haven't mentioned really, and Ruth in the discussion I'm sure will come in on this. I think it's also given confidence to the younger staff in the organisation, the fact that we've got a younger trustee. I think that sort of gives them confidence that the board, when it's considering issues, is considering issues that, as a younger member of staff, is relevant to the work. So, yeah, I think that's an important part about giving confidence to the staff team that we have a board that's relevant.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, we've seen lots of organisations make commitments against equity, diversity and inclusion, and if that's not kind of replicated throughout their leadership structures, that might feel disingenuous to supporters or staff and beneficiaries. It's really interesting. I was going to add as well about something that you pointed out there, both of you actually, about that kind of the culture of the board and the board effectiveness and the skills that might be present on your board. And I think sometimes having a new trustee join highlights some of the current kind of skills gaps and or where some trustees aren't as comfortable. And so you might have one person you really rely on to scrutinise the accounts, and actually having that kind of diverse perspective helps everyone up their game and really get comfortable with all the aspects of governance and board matter that they might have kind of been quite comfortable that someone else is really involved with. And I actually think that's been a real learning point for us as well around, you know, when we run training sessions, we make them as accessible as possible so that everyone, regardless of kind of age or experience, can join and learn together, which has really helped level that playing field. And then I was just going to touch on that other piece around that Rihanna, you picked up on around leadership style. I think there's a real risk around kind of that relationship, kind of a mentor-mentee relationship might become quite parental, might kind of feel slightly patronizing. You know, that's a real risk, I think, for boards who are looking to adopt diversity, that everyone needs to be in the same space, you know, on a level playing field. Everyone is an equal trustee in that room, and really keeping an eye on that kind of culture and sense is really important. And I saw Ruth posted in the chat about mutual mentor or reverse mentoring. Sorry, I'm calling it mutual mentoring. That's the term that we use. And I think that's a really interesting. I don't know, Rihanna or Peter, either of you have used reverse mentoring or mutual mentoring. Maybe I should just explain what it is. So basically, where sort of maybe a more junior member of staff or more junior person has a mentor that they actually, a mentee that they mentor who is more senior or more experienced. And the idea is that the more experienced person learns a lot from the often younger, often less experienced person in a reverse mentoring or mutual mentoring relationship. Either of you have any experience of that or any kind of views on whether that works in this dynamic and space? Peter, over to you.
Yeah, no, I haven't personally. I know Ruth has, as she's put in the chat. I know she's found it hugely valuable, and I'm sure we'll want to come in on it. But I'll pass on to Rihanna in case Rihanna's had experience.
I've been a peer mentor, but not in the capacity of trusteeship, especially now as I'm kind of like the youngest on both ends of the organization. But I think that could be quite a useful approach, definitely.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Ruth Marks, but if you wanted to add anything, you're welcome to come off mute and add something about how that might have worked for you or your experience in that space.
Thanks ever so much, Ruth. And it's lovely to be in a session with somebody else called Ruth, because I don't meet that many other people called Ruth. So hello. But the reverse mentoring opportunity was one that was offered to me through almost a chance conversation with some colleagues in the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner, but linked into the Future Leaders Programme that Peter has just mentioned a few minutes ago. And to begin with, if I'm going to be completely honest, I was nosy and intrigued, so I wanted to get involved for that reason. I also, and this is being completely honest, thought, well, what am I going to learn? Yeah, I'm being completely honest. But my goodness me, did I learn an awful lot. Some of it, the things that I had the chance to talk about and to listen to with the person who was allocated to me as my reverse mentor, my mutual mentor, I like that phrase. Some stuff we talked about was quite specific, and some stuff I'd never even thought about before, but we also just bounced ideas around about approaches to work and different issues that both of us might be facing, or just things going on in mostly our working lives. And partly perhaps because I've worked a lot with older people for many, many years. I've just celebrated my 60th birthday. My husband and I don't have children, therefore we don't have grandchildren. There are not many young people in our lives. So therefore, having an opportunity, a legitimate work opportunity to listen to and chat with and debate with a younger person who is has got a very responsible job in the finance sector in Wales was just absolutely fantastic. And we still keep in occasional contact after the official programme of the reverse or mutual mentoring that went on. It's something that I'd certainly like to look at doing more of and offering within our organisation, and seeing if there are other members or partners, charities in Wales where Peter and I work that might be interested. Thanks very much indeed, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. I agree. It's very lovely to meet another Ruth. It's not that often that we come across each other. That's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for being so honest about that kind of initial view, and I completely understand that and can see that. But really, really pleased that experience led to such beneficial and fruitful conversations. And I've just jotted down a question I suppose I'd ask everyone, which is, how often do you have a conversation with a young person outside of a hierarchy, outside of a parental, grandparental relationship, where you're in a customer client relationship, or you're their senior manager? How often are you having those conversations? And actually, is that something that we need to have more of, and or that we're trying to create here by thinking about more diverse boards? Really interesting. Okay, I'm going to move us on to start thinking about some of the big challenges that we might have faced. So over to you, Rihanna. I'd really love to hear from you. What have been the main kind of challenges you faced beyond the ones that you've already mentioned, and how have you overcome them?
I think that's actually all the challenges that I faced. Definitely the number one is the time constraints, the meetings, because when you're involved with the meetings, you know what's happening, you know what you need to do next and that kind of thing. So the meetings are quite important, but when you fall back on it, you don't really know what's going on and you feel disengaged. So that's kind of like my main thing at the moment. But yeah, apart from that, I don't have anything else.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm really glad that that's been the kind of main challenge. And do you think if, say, your employer was able to release you as kind of that you could have volunteering time during your working hours, would that help alleviate that challenge and help you overcome it?
Yeah, I think that would be. I think it'd be nice to have, something in the schedule that's not just work related, anyways, that I can contribute to. So yeah, if I could work with my employer to do that, that'd be great. But at the moment, I'm in the probationary period, so I don't think that there's it's something that I can ask for at the moment. So that's just another struggle when you're a young person and you're in this kind of settings, like you can't really, it's not something that's negotiable in your eyes at the moment. So yeah, I think it's definitely just a lot of wiggle around thinking of what can I do differently to contribute.
That's really interesting. And obviously younger people are more likely to move roles more often. We have often lots of shifting, and I know I have in my early years of my career. And so you're often in a probationary period where you're working out the dynamics with your new employer. That's really interesting and something that I think, as trustees, we can take on board and consider. Thank you for sharing that. Peter, over to you. What are the kind of big challenges you might have faced, and how have you overcome those?
Yeah. I think probably the initial phase of ensuring that Joe was sort of confident and supported in coming into the board, and Tracy, who's on the line, as company secretary, plays a key role in the induction of new trustees anyway. And I think that her role was really important in building confidence and connection between Joe and the board as part of that induction phase, and building those sort of relationships with 2 or 3 members of the board whom can be part of that longer term relationship that he has, and builds that confidence to be able to contribute at an early stage. We have a system whereby, as chair, I undertake a review every year by speaking individually to each board member. And as part of that review, I remember we did discuss the fact that we needed to address some of the diversity issues, and particularly involving a younger trustee. So in that sense, we had the board was sort of, if you like, fully engaged in the importance of it and committed to it. As part of that review exercise, because I had individual conversations with each board member about how the board was performing, how we were doing, and what we needed to do better at. And obviously this was one of the areas we needed to do better. So the board was fully sort of engaged and invested in that process. And I think that was important.
That's a really interesting point around kind of the whole board being behind it and all lending their support, because I can absolutely see where there's a kind of slightly more controversial approach in terms of recruiting someone you might never have considered previously. If not everyone's on board, then that might come through in the conversations and or the culture that ends up that might set that young person or that different person up to fail at the outset. So that's a really interesting point, and I love that that concept that you have an individual conversation every year with every trustee as a kind of review touch base. That's probably absolutely best practice in terms of governance performance. So really exciting to hear that you do that. That's great. Okay, I'm really keen to make sure that the audience, you guys all have time to ask some questions. So I'm coming to the end of the kind of formal questions. So start to have a think about what you might want to pop into the chat box, or you're very welcome to come off mute. So I'll just close off the formal questions. So start having a think. So my last question formally to you, Rihanna, is what would you say would your top tips be to charities considering this, and any advice you would have wanted to know in advance of becoming a young trustee that you might share with the charities here today?
Yeah, definitely. I would say to get young people, you need to attract them. You have to make the application look, like something that they want to be a part of. You need to make them feel like this is something worth contributing to. So make sure your mission's on there, your vision, your objectives, and don't bombard them with too much priorities on it. Like, you bring them into it slowly. If there's a lot of workload, you don't want to, I guess honesty is the best policy, I would say, but just kind of condense it, make it look like something that it's doable, it's achievable. And then if you've got like a lot of workload, I would also kind of now, before you even put out applications, think about how we can rethink the way that we work and the workload that we bring on, so that we're not overwhelmed and the young person that comes is not overwhelmed, because that's the worst thing you want to do. You've got a young person and then you've got all this workload going on and they're trying to figure out their role and their responsibilities, and it's just a bit all over the place. You want to be in a position where everyone's highly organized. You've got a, like a form of communication, everything's in check before they come, because that's something that would definitely put a young person off. They'll just be like, it's quite too much for me, for a voluntary role, it's quite overwhelming. So, they will be quick to say no to that kind of thing. So just make sure that what you're putting out is, in a way will attract someone. I think also maybe even reviewing it with a young person. If you've got a young trustee already, say, does this application look like something you would want to be a part of? I know you're already a part of us, but, just from a perspective, a youthful perspective, would you want to apply for this role? So yeah, just have a think of that kind of thing, because remember, it's about young people. You're attracting young people, so you need to involve them in everything that you put out. I would also say making them feel welcome, and in terms of the workload, like I say, don't bombard them, because that will just kind of limit their confidence, and imposter syndrome will come, and that is something you don't want to deal with, and you don't want a young person to deal with, because when that happens, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of, why am I here, what qualifies me to be a trustee, and that kind of thing. And then you have to break that down, and that's a whole thing that it takes time to uncover with the imposter syndrome. So yeah, just make sure you identify that, you explain things clearly, you write things down, you think about what kind of level of communication works best for these young people, and just have things easily digestible, have handbooks, have guides in place, so they know what they're doing, they've got things to read, they've got things to listen to, and you're having check-ins with them. How's the role going? Is it going well? What can we do better? That kind of thing is very important, just making sure that they're comfortable in their position and they've got everything that they need to fulfill this role, and just, yeah, making them feel involved as much as possible.
Thanks, Rihanna. That's such a load of really, really helpful top tips there, and particularly picking on that last point you made around the resources that boards can provide, and it is quite a lot of effort to develop those resources, but I think it's so valuable. I think it's really worth thinking about the way that people learn has changed and is changing. University experiences, school experiences are so different year on year, and young people might not learn in the same way that we've all learned, or that other people have learned. They might not want to read in the same way, they might want to listen, and that's really interesting, and that requires such a shift in terms of the resources that boards provide, the training that they offer, and obviously there's lots of sector bodies that do that kind of stuff too, that might want to adapt the training that they develop for young people into that governance and board space in a different way. Really, really helpful and interesting. Peter, over to you. What would you say your kind of top tips are?
I think I've probably covered them all in what I've said already, and I'm sort of keen to get any further input from colleagues on the call. And Rihanna certainly summed up the key points, I think, well there. My only point I'll just say is let's just sort of review now how we're engaging and how we're interacting with young people. Are we having those conversations? Yeah, and that's the starting point. You've got to have those conversations before you get the trustees.
So it's almost like building a pipeline of volunteers who might have leadership, potential and could go on to be trustees.
Yeah, like the organisation's got to have a conversation with young people. It's not, that's the basic starting point.
Really, really helpful. Thank you. Okay, over to the audience. Please do pop your questions in the chat. I can see one that's come in asking about if any younger people in this session think that too much bureaucracy is likely to put them off. Is light touch better to start with? So Rihanna, I'll open that to you first, and then I might ask Kate as well if you've got a view on that. So yeah, would you say too much bureaucracy, is that likely to put you off, and is light touch better to start?
I think so. Yeah, light touch, definitely. Just kind of gradually bringing the young person into the environment is just a healthy way to start, because first impressions matter. Although people say can contradict this, it does matter. So you have to make sure from the start and onto the end, they feel like, they've got a voice, and it's not just chairman and members and things like that. We all work collectively, and they need to see that, or it's always going to be, I'm just a member, I'm not chairman, so what's my role, what's my position, what's my responsibilities, that kind of thing. And just making sure responsibilities are clear as well would be very helpful, because you don't want to give them something outside their responsibilities. You want to kind of bring in that wholesome centered role that they signed up for as well.
Great. Yeah, really, really interesting. Kate, did you have a view on that? What's your view on bureaucracy and light versus light touch?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it comes back to some of the stuff Rihanna's been mentioning around that time. Obviously, young people are often quite stretched for time. And I think you've really got to see within the recruitment and the discussions you're having with the organisation about being a trustee there, that your time that you're putting into them is going to be valuable in some way, that it's not just tokenistic. You're not just there as another member of the board to read through and do some administrative stuff and sort of fill out all the bureaucracy stuff, that you really are there to make an impact. And I think you can obviously make an impact through governance channels, through bureaucracy, if that does exist and it has a reason to exist and you can see the value behind it. But I think that's kind of where the balance needs to be struck between that sort of necessary governance and bureaucracy that exists, but also the young person being able to see how their contribution specifically can add value into that conversation. And I think for a lot of young people that haven't been in a trustee role before, the word trustee in itself is a slightly confusing term. The word governance, that doesn't mean too much to someone who doesn't understand it. So I think if you are going to specify some of those responsibilities, as Rihanna says, it does need to be broken down into a way that makes sense to the young people, but also sounds appealing. So like if you ask most young people, would you like to be involved in some of the decision-making processes of a charity? I'm sure they'd absolutely say yes, absolutely be interested. But if you then translate that into it's a trustee role and it's all about governance, they might not get at first glance what that means for them and how they can then engage with it. And so I think that kind of wording that you use and how you discuss and recruit people into trusteeship is great. Like, for example, I'm a massive governance geek now, I love it. But originally I didn't quite know what that meant. And I think it's just being able to get into that space then really builds your confidence to understand it going forward.
I couldn't agree more, Kate. I absolutely agree with you. And I was thinking actually about that question. I love knowledge. I feel really scared and uncertain if I don't know everything that I possibly can. I haven't absorbed as much. So when people are kind of, when I'm joining an organization, I want to read everything. I want to know about all the structures. I want to see all the subcommittee terms of reference. But I only want to do that because I know I've had it explained to me in that language that the bureaucracy and the governance actually establishes us to be able to achieve the impact that we want to have as an organization. So yeah, couldn't agree more. At my first role, I would have been completely boggled by all that language. And so yeah, it's got to be really linked to the impact you make, which is really, really interesting. Another question I want to put out here is, how could an organisation who is keen to recruit a young trustee go about persuading other members of the board who are not open to this already? So Peter, I might ask you to take that one.
Yeah, it's why I started tonight with a focus on the sort of purpose of the board, really, and the focus on what we're trying to achieve as a board. And the biggest danger, I think, to board effectiveness is groupthink. And that sort of cozy nature that boards can create, and that is, that has to be challenged, and it has to be challenged by the board, by the chair, by the other members of the board, and of course that is then about equality, about diversity and inclusion. But it is groupthink that is the biggest danger to the sector. If you look at all the big failures the sector's had, the high-profile failures, and lack of trust that's emerged as a result of those failures, it all comes down to groupthink at board level. And that's because we haven't got the right voices around the board, and particularly the right young people's voices around the board. And that's, the board has to challenge itself on that basis.
That's brilliant, really powerful stuff, Peter. Thank you. Another question, I'm just conscious of time. We've got a few minutes left, so I'll probably take one last question and then we'll hand over to Kate for closing comments. So the last question is, how would you suggest a balance can be found between identifying and persuading young people to take an interest and ensuring that they can bring a skill or perspective that fills a need on the board, i.e. is being young the key criteria here? Often thinking about trustees go out to recruit and look for financial experience, governance experience, etc. Rihanna, did you want to pick up that one?
Yeah, sure. I think being young helps as a youth trustee because we bring new perspectives, new way of thinking, new skills, and current skills like social media skills and that kind of thing, which is very valid, and it kind of boosts the visibility of the organization. So it's just understanding the gaps and how young people can fill them, really. In terms of finding a balance that can be found between identifying, so I think just seeing how that particular skill suits a young person is very valid in terms of advertising, how you'd promote it and what channels you'd use to promote it, whether it be social media, whether it be through your council or something like that. Thinking about where you'd find these young people with these kind of skills will determine the kind of caliber and talent of young people you will get for these applications.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. Thinking about, what level of expertise you need. Obviously, if you go out and say you need legal expertise, but we want a young trustee, you're not likely to get someone that young who has significant legal experience. But think about what level of experience you need to bring a breadth of skills and experience to that space. Peter, sorry, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think sometimes we overthink the trustee, the advert for trustees and the job description for trustees. I think we overthink it, and we put far too much detail into it, and it's like we're like recruiting the next finance director for the organisation or whatever. We just overthink it, and we just need a simpler language and clarity about what we want, without sort of setting unnecessary expectations or overcomplicating it, basically.
Yeah, completely agree. That's a discussion we've just been having on the board I'm on, and we are going for someone that can bring passion, enthusiasm, interest, and can make some time around their diary to help and get involved is our kind of key criteria beyond any professional experience.
Yeah,
right, I think that's.
Sorry. I was also going to say, personality is also important, especially if it's like a client-facing, community-based position, trustee position. I mean, you need to have someone that's well-rounded in terms of skills, but also in terms of their personality. So I think also putting like personality traits on the application, and like Peter said, it doesn't have to be clear-cut standard trustee applications. Like you can modify things in terms of your mission and your objectives of this trustee role. So I think don't just kind of put a bland thing out there. It needs to be very defined. It needs to be very accurate. It needs to be what you want, the kind of young person you want to bring into your board. It will definitely help you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Kate to close the event today, but just to say thank you so much to both our speakers and to everyone here. Lots of us will be volunteers, lots of us will be paid staff, but working quite late today. Thank you all so much for making the time, and over to you, Kate, to kind of give our closing statements.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I'm just going to share my screen as well, if that's worked. Yeah,
you can see it.
Sorry, I can't work out how to make it go on big screen. See, that's what they say about young trustees, really good at digital, not always the case. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for listening today. It's been really interesting to hear from our speakers. I personally have found it really interesting to hear their insights. Obviously it was titled The Good, the Bad and the Ugly of Trusteeship and Board Diversity. I think the good, we've definitely heard about the different perspectives that young people can bring, the energy and the passion and the relationships that you form, but also the values that you look for when recruiting trustees and how you can really find those in young people as well. And obviously we spoke a little about the pipeline for future generations and future leaders within the charity sector, which Young Trustees obviously does a massive job in terms of helping support, and the positive implications that that can have for your organisation as well. And in terms of the bad or the ugly, or as we might want to call them, the challenges of young trustees, obviously not potentially having some support from your board does create a bit of a challenge to overcome. There are aspects to consider around the practicalities and the accessibility for everybody to be able to really feel like they can value like their input in that space and they can be a really productive and useful trustee for the organisation. Aspects around that potentially leading to disengagement and how we can try and prevent that and try and overcome that barrier so that young people really feel like their voices are being heard in these spaces. But also adequate support for the young trustee themselves and how we're going to develop that within charitable organisations to make that role really effective, and how we could potentially combat some of the imposter syndrome by really empowering and championing our young trustees as well. So yeah, I just want to say thank you very much to our guest speakers and for all of you to come along today. It's been a really useful and wonderful event from my perspective. If you want to continue this conversation, there are a few next steps that you can take. So you can check out the Young Trustees Movement website. I've also put an email and a Twitter up there that you can get in touch with us on if you want to keep talking about this. There are also a lot of more resources on the website, things around events and champion training that we run, and also the opportunity to advertise for a role, which is free to do if you are advertising any upcoming trustee vacancies and you'd like to attract more young trustees on the board. You can also find out more about Time to Change by contacting Laura on the details that are on the screen. So please do get in touch if you're a Surrey organisation who's looking to engage with young people in volunteering roles. Young people in that context usually means about 19 to 25, but please do get in touch with Laura if you would like to talk about that project anymore. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to the Young Trustees Movement and Time to Change, the Surrey Council Voluntary Services, for helping facilitate this event today. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to everyone for coming along. I hope you'll have a lovely rest of your evenings. But yeah, thank you very much.
And there is a feedback link in the chat if you want to give us some feedback about how the event has been for you and anything we can do differently in the future.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks to our speakers. Lovely to see you all.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Nice to meet you, Ruth. Don't know if everyone could hear my dog having a big romp around the living room during that process.
I couldn't hear it.
I didn't hear it.
That's good. That's the point of the headset.
Oh, thank you, guys. That was brilliant. It was really good.
How's your internet, Laura?
Oh, it came back on. Yeah, it came back on, so it was okay in the end. I don't know what happened, but yeah, we got it on for the recording at least. That was the bit I was worried about, but
yeah, of course. Oh yeah, we're still recording, aren't we? Should we stop
I'll
that?
stop that, yeah.